What if I told you there's a brain exercise that might slow aging, something almost hidden from mainstream science? Not a pill, not a cream, not some expensive treatment, but a secret mind technique buried in the forgotten research of a man who vanished without a trace. Jacobo Grinberg. Most people have never heard his name, and yet this Mexican neuroscientist spent decades exploring something that could change how we see the human mind and even time itself. While other scientists measured brainwaves and cells, Grinberg searched for the invisible thread connecting all consciousness, a field he believed could shape reality itself. And here's where it gets strange. Before he disappeared in 1994, Grinberg claimed he had witnessed shamans perform what seemed impossible: instant healing, matter moving without touch, minds merging across distances. He wasn't just collecting stories, he was documenting them. He brought these shamans into his lab, hooked them up to EEG machines, and found something bizarre. Their brains synchronized, their waves aligned like two instruments tuning to the same note. Grinberg called this mysterious state syntergy. He believed that when the mind becomes fully coherent, like a perfectly tuned orchestra, it taps into what he called the informational matrix. And if that's true, then maybe aging itself is only a story our minds are repeating again and again, until we finally decide to change the script. Because here's the part almost no one talks about. Grinberg suspected that our thoughts don't just live inside our heads. They ripple outward, shaping the field of reality, and if our thoughts can shape the field, they might also shape our bodies. Imagine, instead of battling age from the outside, what if you could influence it from the inside by shifting the very pattern of your mind? This is the forbidden exercise hidden in Grinberg's work. Not forbidden because it's dangerous, but because it threatens everything we've been told about what's possible. In this video, you're going to learn exactly how this mind technique works, the logic behind it, the hidden experiments, and the simple steps to try it for yourself. By the end, you'll see how your brain can become more than an observer. It can become a creator. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real key to slowing down the clock. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll hear today could completely change how you see your mind, your body, and time itself. The mainstream world buried Grinberg's discoveries after he vanished, but his notes, his data, and his ideas survived, and they hold clues to the extraordinary power locked inside you. Welcome to Awakened Synchronicity, where hidden knowledge meets everyday transformation. If you're ready to uncover the secret mind exercise Jacobo Grinberg believed could stop aging, make sure you hit subscribe right now, so you never miss the truths they don't want you to know. Before we talk about the mind exercise that could slow aging, we need to understand the man who uncovered it, Jacobo Grinberg. Because to understand his technique, you first have to understand how his mind worked, and why he dared to explore places most scientists refuse to even look at. Jacobo Grinberg was born in Mexico City in 1946, and from an early age he was obsessed with the mysteries of the mind. He studied psychology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and later continued his research in psychophysiology and neuroscience at the Brain Research Institute in New York. While his classmates focused on behavior, memory, or brain chemistry, Grinberg was fascinated by something far stranger: consciousness itself. He wanted to know not just how the brain works, but how experience happens. Why do we feel? Why do we see reality the way we do? What if what we call reality is only a projection of the mind? As his career advanced, Grinberg grew frustrated with the limits of traditional science. Brain scans could measure electrical activity, but they couldn't explain awareness. Neuroscience could track signals, but it couldn't say where thoughts truly begin. That's when he began searching beyond the walls of the laboratory. He wanted to study human experience not only as data, but as something living, something fluid. This curiosity pulled him into the world of indigenous knowledge, the ancient traditions and shamanic practices of Mexico's native peoples. Grinberg spent years living among shamans, watching their rituals, listening to their stories. He saw things that didn't fit into textbooks, healings that defied logic, visions that revealed information no one else could know, and people entering altered states where the boundaries of the self seemed to dissolve. Instead of dismissing these events as superstition, he decided to measure them. He brought shamans into his laboratory, connected them to EEG machines, and observed what their brains did during their most intense moments. What he found was extraordinary. Their brainwaves shifted into deep coherence. The different parts of their brains stopped working like isolated machines and started pulsing together like a single rhythm. Even more astonishing, when two people worked together like a shaman and a patient, their brainwaves sometimes synchronized. It was as if their minds were temporarily joining into one. This phenomenon became the foundation of his life's work. Grinberg called this state syntergy, a term he created from synthesis and energy. He believed that when the brain reaches this high level of coherence, it can access what he described as the informational matrix, an invisible field that connects all consciousness and all matter. According to him, this matrix is the underlying blueprint of reality itself. Every thought, every perception, every moment of awareness is like a ripple in this vast field. When the mind becomes quiet and focused enough, it can stop being just an observer and start interacting with the matrix directly. This was not just theory for Grinberg. He thought this was the key to understanding human potential and possibly the key to unlocking powers long considered impossible. He believed that consciousness could influence not only perception, but also physical reality, even the biology of our own bodies. That belief would drive the rest of his work and lead him closer to the secret mind exercise he believed could bend the limits of time and aging. To understand the mind exercise Jacobo Grinberg believed could influence aging, we need to step into the world he built, a world where consciousness doesn't just experience reality, but actually shapes it. This idea was at the heart of everything he discovered, and it became the foundation for what he called the informational matrix. Grinberg believed that everything we see, touch, and think is part of a vast hologram. Not a physical hologram made of light, but a living, conscious hologram made of information. He saw reality not as a collection of separate objects, but as an interconnected field where mind and matter constantly interact. According to him, what we call the world is like the surface of a deep ocean, and consciousness is the ocean beneath it. Every thought, every emotion, every perception is a ripple moving through that invisible sea. Most of modern science treats consciousness as something that happens inside the brain, like steam rising from boiling water. But Grinberg flipped that idea upside down. He suggested that consciousness might be the source, not the byproduct, the hidden framework on which everything else rests. He called this framework the informational matrix, and he believed it contained all possibilities, all forms, all moments of reality. The brain, in his view, wasn't creating experience. It was decoding the matrix, translating waves of pure information into the solid world we think we see. This is why he believed we are not just observers. We are participants. Every act of attention, every focus of awareness, slightly reshapes the matrix. When you observe reality, you're not standing outside of it. You're inside it, molding it, whether you realize it or not. This idea was radical. It meant that the boundaries between mind and world were not as solid as we've been taught. Your thoughts might not be trapped inside your skull. They might reach into the fabric of reality itself. To explore this further, Grinberg developed what became known as the syntergic theory. The word syntergy came from synthesis and energy. He used it to describe a state where the brain's neurons operate in harmony, like instruments in perfect tune. Normally, our brains are noisy. Different regions fire out of sync, competing for attention, scattered across countless thoughts. But when people enter deep states of meditation, creativity, or shamanic trance, that chaos disappears. The brain shifts into a coherent rhythm. Grinberg believed this coherence was the key to interacting with the informational matrix. When the brain becomes synchronized, it stops merely decoding reality and starts influencing it. In a state of high syntergy, your mind can leave ripples on the matrix instead of just receiving them. This was a bold claim, but Grinberg didn't base it only on theory. He tried to prove it through experiments. In his laboratory, he brought in people trained in meditation and shamanic practices. He connected them to EEG machines to measure their brainwaves. What he found was remarkable. As they entered focused, silent states, their brainwaves began to align, the chaotic spikes and dips smoothed into patterns, like waves rolling together on a calm sea. Even more astonishing, when two people focused on the same intention, their brain patterns sometimes synchronized, as if their minds were linking into one field. Grinberg saw this as evidence that syntergic coherence could allow people to connect beyond the boundaries of individual brains. He described it as two minds accessing the same region of the matrix at the same time. This wasn't just a poetic metaphor to him. He believed the brain could become like an antenna, tuning into the matrix, receiving and sending information across distances outside the usual limits of space and time. To understand how far he took this idea, you have to look at the shamans who inspired much of his work, especially Pachita and María Sabina. These were not scientists. They were indigenous healers rooted in centuries of tradition, practicing in remote regions of Mexico. But to Grinberg, they held the keys to a hidden human potential that modern science had forgotten. Pachita was perhaps the most shocking example. She was a curandera, a healer, known for performing what people called psychic surgeries. Witnesses claimed she could extract tumors, repair damaged organs, and even remove and replace entire internal parts using nothing more than her hands and a crude hunting knife. But what stunned Grinberg was not the stories. It was what he saw with his own eyes. He watched Pachita perform operations in trance-like states, guided, she said, by the spirit of an ancient Aztec king named Cuauhtémoc. She would make small incisions, insert her hands, and pull out tissue that looked real and physical. Afterward, the patients often recovered astonishingly quickly, with no signs of infection or trauma. Grinberg studied her during these sessions, recording her brain activity. He found that her brain entered an unusual state of coherence, a deep, unified rhythm unlike anything seen in normal waking consciousness. For him, Pachita was a living demonstration of syntergy in action. He believed she was tapping directly into the informational matrix, temporarily rewriting the pattern of the patient's body to match a healthy version stored in the field. From his perspective, she wasn't defying biology. She was editing it from the level of information. María Sabina offered a different path into the same mystery. She was a Mazatec shaman from the mountains of Oaxaca, famous for her sacred mushroom ceremonies. People from around the world came to sit with her, including artists, poets, and researchers. Under her guidance, they entered altered states where they felt as if they were dissolving into light, merging with the universe, or seeing the hidden architecture of existence. Grinberg visited María Sabina and observed how she guided people into these states with songs, chants, and rituals. He noticed that the participants often described the same visions, as if they were all accessing a shared space beyond individual minds. To him, this was another sign of the informational matrix, a collective field of consciousness that anyone could reach when the brain became synchronized enough. These encounters convinced Grinberg that the brain's ordinary mode of operation keeps us locked in a narrow tunnel of reality. We see only what we expect to see, because our neural activity is fragmented and noisy. But when syntergy increases, when the mind becomes still and unified, it can open a doorway into the matrix. In that state, reality becomes fluid, flexible, and responsive to intention. This was the foundation of his most daring idea, that human consciousness can directly alter the physical world, not by force, but by reshaping the underlying pattern of information. Pachita's surgeries and Maria Sabina's visions were not supernatural to him. They were examples of what happens when someone steps out of the ordinary tunnel of perception and enters the deeper field that creates the tunnel itself. Grinberg believed this was not just the secret of shamanic power, it was the hidden potential of every human mind. If we can train our brains to reach syntergic states, we might be able to influence not only our perceptions, but the structure of our own biology. And if that's possible, then the boundaries of aging, healing, and time might be far more flexible than we've ever imagined. Jacobo Grinberg never left behind a clear step-by-step guide to what he called the forbidden exercise. There is no single page in his notebooks where he names it directly, but hidden between his experiments, his observations, and the stories he told, we can trace its shape, like the outline of something seen through mist. He hinted that this practice was less about doing something new, and more about undoing the habits that keep the mind fragmented. It wasn't about controlling the body, but about aligning consciousness itself. He believed the first step was stillness. Grinberg wrote often about silence, not as an absence of sound, but as a state of mind. He observed that the human brain is normally filled with constant chatter, loops of thought, scattered attention, bursts of worry. This mental noise keeps our neurons firing out of sync, like instruments all playing different songs at once. To reach the syntergic state he described, that noise must fade. The mind has to become focused, unified like a single note vibrating through the whole brain. Meditation was the clearest doorway into this. Grinberg didn't see meditation as just relaxation. He saw it as a method of rewiring attention. When someone meditates deeply, they stop chasing thoughts and start observing them. This shifts the brain from chaos into coherence. Regions that usually compete for control begin to synchronize. In this state, the person's sense of time slows down, sometimes even disappears. Grinberg suggested this is where the mind starts to slip beyond the normal boundaries of aging, because aging itself is tied to our sense of time. If you can leave the ordinary flow of time, even briefly, you step outside its grip. He also spoke of controlling attention as if it were energy. He believed that attention carries a kind of subtle force, a vibration that shapes the field of the informational matrix. Normally our attention jumps from one thing to another, scattering our energy, but when we hold it steady, it becomes powerful. He compared this to light. Diffuse light barely warms the skin, but focused into a laser, it can cut through steel. The forbidden exercise, then, would involve gathering scattered attention and compressing it into a single beam. Grinberg hinted that this concentrated attention could begin to affect the body at a cellular level. He theorized that when the mind becomes coherent, it may influence the body's informational patterns, the hidden blueprint of how cells behave. This could explain why people who reach deep meditative states often show lower stress hormones, stronger immune systems, and slower markers of biological aging. He believed the mind could act like a tuning fork, bringing the body's systems back into harmony. One of the main mechanisms he described was the reduction of stress. Chronic stress floods the body with cortisol, a hormone that accelerates cellular aging and weakens repair processes. Grinberg argued that stress is largely created by mental time, the mind's constant jumping between the past and the future. When you are fully present, stress fades, because there is nothing to fear in the immediate moment. The forbidden exercise would involve pulling attention away from mental time and anchoring it in the now, until the mind becomes silent and timeless. He also spoke about fear as a kind of energetic distortion. Fear scatters neuronal patterns, breaking coherence. It creates tension, both mental and physical, which disrupts the flow of information through the brain. To him, overcoming fear was essential to reaching the syntergic state. This didn't mean suppressing fear, but observing it without reaction, watching it until it dissolves. When fear dissolves, energy stops scattering, and the mind's vibration becomes steady again. Grinberg's students and colleagues later recalled that he often practiced long periods of stillness, sitting with his eyes closed, doing nothing outwardly at all. But inside, he was guiding his awareness through layers of perception, stripping away thoughts until only pure presence remained. This presence, he believed, was the key. When the mind holds nothing, it can become everything. When it lets go of form, it can touch the formless matrix that gives birth to form. To bring this into daily practice, Grinberg suggested simple but exact steps. Begin with short sessions of silent sitting, 5 to 10 minutes each day. Focus on your breath, not trying to control it, but watching it rise and fall. When thoughts appear, don't fight them, let them pass like clouds. This builds the muscle of attention. Over time, increase the duration until silence feels natural. He also emphasized visualization, not as imagination, but as energetic alignment. Once the mind is quiet, visualize yourself as filled with light or as a pattern of vibrating energy. The image isn't important. What matters is the feeling of coherence, as if every part of you is resonating together. Grinberg believed this mental image helps the neurons synchronize because the brain responds to imagined states almost as if they are real. Breathing techniques can enhance this effect. Slow, rhythmic breathing calms the nervous system and helps the brain shift from beta waves, alert, busy, into alpha and theta waves. Relaxed, focused, these slower waves are often linked with healing, creativity, and deep learning. Grinberg found that people in these states showed more synchronized brain activity on EEG scans. He believed that when breathing becomes calm and even, the mind's energy stabilizes, making it easier to reach syntergy. Another part of the practice is self-observation. Grinberg taught that most of our mental energy is lost in unconscious loops, automatic reactions, old stories, inner commentary. Simply noticing these patterns begins to break them. He advised watching your inner dialogue as if it belonged to someone else. This creates distance from your thoughts and reduces their grip. As these loops dissolve, attention gathers back into the present moment, increasing coherence. This combination, stillness, focused attention, visualization, rhythmic breathing, and self-observation, seems to be the skeleton of the forbidden exercise. It is not dramatic on the outside, but inside it reshapes the way the brain functions. The goal is not to think more, but to think less, until thinking stops altogether. In that silent space, Grinberg believed the mind can touch the informational matrix directly. And if the mind can touch the matrix, it can change the blueprint the body follows. He suggested that aging may not be fixed, but partially programmed by our own perception of time and decline. When we live inside that story, the body obeys. But if we step out of the story, even for a few moments each day, the body might begin to follow a different pattern. That was the hope hidden in his work, that by entering silence and coherence, the mind could write a new script for the body to follow. Jacobo Grinberg's work has fascinated many, but it has also drawn intense skepticism. Even during his lifetime, much of the scientific community dismissed his findings as unproven and speculative. They argued that while his experiments showed unusual patterns in brain activity, they didn't prove that minds were merging or that reality was being reshaped. Some said his results could be explained by coincidence, suggestion, or even equipment errors. Others claimed that the extraordinary stories he documented, shamans healing with their hands, people sharing visions across distances, lacked the strict controls needed to be considered scientific evidence. Grinberg was aware of these criticisms, but he kept pushing forward. He believed that the existing tools of science were not yet capable of measuring the deeper layers of consciousness he was trying to explore. Still, this lack of mainstream validation leaves his theories standing on uncertain ground. There are no large-scale replications of his studies, no controlled clinical trials confirming his concept of the informational matrix or syntergic states. For this reason, his work lives in a strange space between science and mystery, between documented data and personal belief. Because of this, caution is essential. Grinberg's ideas can inspire, but they can also be misunderstood. Some people become so fascinated by the possibility of reshaping reality with their minds that they lose touch with reality itself. They may begin to think they can cure any illness or stop aging completely through thought alone, ignoring medical care or healthy habits. Others might use his theories as an escape, spending hours trying to reach altered states while neglecting their responsibilities in the physical world. Grinberg never suggested abandoning life. He wanted to expand it. But without balance, overbelief can become a trap, turning inspiration into illusion. Despite the controversies, there were moments in Grinberg's research that still defy easy explanation. One of the most striking cases was his work with the healer Pachita. He documented multiple sessions where she appeared to perform complex surgeries using only her hands, removing tissue and then somehow sealing the wounds. Grinberg measured her brain waves during these sessions and found them in deep, synchronized patterns he had rarely seen before. Patients often reported rapid recoveries and little pain afterward, though these claims were never tested under controlled hospital conditions. Another set of reports came from people who participated in joint meditation experiments in his lab. Grinberg would place two subjects in separate rooms, asking them to focus on connecting with each other silently. In some trials, their brain waves began to show synchronized rhythms, even though they were apart and shielded from sensory contact. The effect was inconsistent, but when it happened, it was striking. Participants described feeling a shared presence, like their minds were overlapping. Even today, there are anecdotal stories from people who practice techniques inspired by Grinberg's work. They speak of sudden calm flashes of intuitive knowing, or feeling years younger after deep sessions of silence and focused attention. These personal accounts are not scientific proof, but they keep his ideas alive, hovering between doubt and possibility, waiting for someone brave enough to test them again. What if the true power to slow aging has been hidden inside your mind all along? Jacobo Grinberg believed that consciousness isn't just a passive witness, it's an active force, shaping the very fabric of reality. He showed us glimpses of something most of science still ignores, that when the mind becomes deeply focused, deeply coherent, it may be able to influence the body, time, and even the flow of life itself. You've just walked through his world, from his bold experiments to the shamans who seemed to bend reality, from the mysterious informational matrix to the quiet, forbidden exercise of pure attention. It's strange, even unsettling, to imagine that our thoughts might leave fingerprints on the physical world. But maybe that's why this matters. Because if the mind truly shapes what we become, then learning to master it isn't just an idea, it's a responsibility. Tonight, give yourself a few quiet minutes. Sit in silence. Breathe slowly. Focus your mind like a beam of light. Watch your thoughts drift by without grabbing them. And just for a moment, imagine that time itself is listening. Small steps like this might seem trivial, but they're how great transformations begin, not with force, but with stillness. If this journey into Grinberg's hidden world sparked something inside you, then stay with us. There's so much more to uncover, and so much more of your own mind left to explore. Like this video, if it inspired you, and subscribe to Awaken Synchronicity so you don't miss the next doorway into the unknown. Your mind holds more than you think, and this is just the beginning.